Hi, my name is Greg Santore. I am the leader of the sports leadership practice at Witt Kieffer. I'm joined today by my friends and colleagues, Patti Phillips, the CEO of NACWA on my left, and on my right, Chris Plonsky, the Women's Athletic Director at the University of Texas. Today we're really going to talk about the skills needed, the changes that women have seen over time in collegiate athletics and in general in the workplace. So with our distinguished panel, I'm going to throw a few questions out there. We're going to have some topics and speak about what the specific needs are in athletics today. So, Patti, I'll start with you. Just in general, what are some of the patterns you've noticed over the years with women at work, the changes in collegiate athletics, and where they were maybe 10 years ago and where we are today?
Yeah. We've come a long way. We still have room for progress. Some of the trends we're seeing are not as different for women as they are for men, as far as who's getting hired and tracks for getting hired at certain levels. And I'm sure we'll get more into that later. But overall, in the industry of intercollegiate athletics, there's more women now that are in administration that do want to advance into leadership positions. I think if you go back to the AIAW when the transition into the NCAA, there were more back at that time, and then when the women's athletic departments went away and they went co-ed, there wasn't as many women in those departments to move forward. I think we're getting back to where we're building the pipeline. So that's number one. There's more women at all levels, and so what we're trying to do is get more strategic in understanding what it takes to advance to the next levels. And again, and we three have talked about this quite a bit, the skills needed are not different for men and women. What's happened is women aren't necessarily in the tracks getting the skills they need to advance. So I'm sure we'll dive into more of that later. So the difference is, I think times are changing, that we're looking for more women in leadership. One of the differences is there's more women now that are ready, and we have to make sure that they're qualified, that we need to make sure that they are following the strategic path to get there.
Chris, you have anything to add to that comment?
In my case, being on a very large major research campus, I think we're following some of the tracks that we're seeing in higher education at places like the University of Texas. For example, we've had an executive director of our alumni association who was female, came from Silicon Valley before she performed that job. Today, we have a vice president for student affairs, a woman of color, executive VP provost who's a female. Women who are advanced, deputy to the president today at the University of Texas is female. So I look at our division in intercollegiate athletics, which is clearly a very interactive and publicly focused area, reaches out to the public, brings a lot of public to campus. And our constituencies, our donors, our fans, our students, our faculty, tax-paying citizens expect to see the diversity in our divisions that they see in other areas of the state. And I think we're making good progress at the University of Texas.
Good. Well, we talk about this all the time. What are the skill sets needed? And regardless of a male or a female right now, I think one thing that we're all seeing is the fundraising request with all the changes in collegiate sports, the Power 5 conferences, certainly trying to compete with each other and kind of move up the ladder. What do you do as a group in NACWA specifically to help educate females on how to be fundraisers? What do you tell them? What are those? How do you get into that? What's your first exposure to fundraising and such?
Yeah, so it's interesting. We're all nodding our heads, and we three have talked quite a bit about this. I mean, some of the skills, fundraising, we'll talk about football, I'm sure, finance and budgeting. But Greg, some of what we're doing is working with folks like you and working with the search firms and asking how's it going in the searches and what are the presidents and what are the schools asking for. And we know with where the industry is right now that raising money is such a huge part of that. The other F is facilities, actually. For the facilities and for coaches' salaries. So how do they get into that? I mean, they are raising money a lot of times within their programs. So whether it's within women's basketball or different pieces, and what we tell them is they have to get involved with the bigger parts of fundraising, and so they have to go to the folks that are doing that and find out how that's happening. Everybody knows how to raise money, and it's especially when you're in this industry, and a lot of times for women, they have to be selling more what they are doing. They have to talk about how they are generating revenue in a lot of different ways, but also we're talking big money now, especially as you go up in the divisions in the Power Five. So they do have to get involved with raising big dollars. And if they aren't the ones making the ask, make sure they know how the asks are getting made. You know, at Texas, they actually have a whole different department that Chris can talk about. They have a whole different corporation raising money. So some of the administrators probably aren't doing that, but they're connected with it. So it is understanding the process. How are the asks getting made? You know, how are we cultivating donors? All those pieces of fundraising, women can learn those even if they aren't specifically tagged as a fundraiser.
Chris, what do you do to help expose your folks overall, but in specific to the females, how to get them involved more in cultivating their skills?
Well, it's fairly easy by definition because at a state-supported school like Texas, you're self-sustaining in athletics. You can't use any tax money, can't use any academic money, so we pay our own bills. We're defined as an auxiliary on campus, and we're not the only ones. Our recreational sports department is an auxiliary. Housing and food, meaning the dorms and the dining rooms for students on campus, is an auxiliary, as is parking and transportation. So we have, if you will, colleagues on campus who are operating under the same financial auspices that we are. It's just, again, we are doing this service for 500 young men and women. But you're right, Patty, everybody does know how to fundraise. And the skill sets that you talked about. I mean, I came up as an SID. I was a communications person, majored in journalism. But what you learn, even as a journalism person, is things are relational.
Exactly.
So you have to communicate so effectively and build relationships with people before you ask them for a lead, a story idea, an interconnection, or money. And if you think about it, it's the same if you're an administrator working with coaches. I mean, you can't just walk in and you might be the best brain on the planet for operations and scheduling and whatever, but if you can't connect with your coach personally and connect with your student athletes, you won't get very far. So I start with communication, passion, the ability to connect, and from there you can do everything. You can raise revenue, you can run sports, you can run departments.
And Chris, let me clarify, since you said that, which is great, and I didn't mean to say everybody is fundraising, but you're right. If you want to be a leader, you are relational. And so fundraising is a piece of that. So you can be a fundraiser. And so that's a great point of clarification. And especially as women, we're known as being relational. And what we're not doing is talking about it enough. We're not admitting that we are doing those things and that these skill sets are transferable. But also, speaking of having schools that raise their own money, you're one of the few that are making it, actually, you know, without getting school support. So how are you guys doing that?
Well, again, it takes a village, and it is everybody. Revenue generation, again, comes with the territory for us, but we learned a long time ago that you just can't depend upon results only, wins and losses. If you think about it, of the 400 or so employees in athletics at Texas, not everybody's a coach, and it's the coaches that are the master teachers, and they coach the kids to get the results. So we have to depend on relationships, telling the story about why college athletics is a valid entity to give to. You are providing the support for these young people to get a collegiate experience, and not just in sports, personal and leadership development, academics, to have that degree that go on in life. I mean, if you think about it, at the Lead One level, 135 or so schools, we probably have, 50,000 athletes? If 1% of them go on to make a living with their arms or legs or their skill set, that's very few. So when you're fundraising or you're going out for sponsorships or media rights, you're really supporting the advancement of these other young leaders so they can go on and be productive citizens. You can tell that story to anybody, and if you're good enough at your communication skills, you can get them to step forward and support.
So Chris said it's telling stories.
Let me ask you, and I want to ask this in two parts, because there's always, things have evolved. When we started working together 5 years ago, we talked about this, and Chris, you and I have worked together too, but the observations of why at the time, we needed more females in leadership positions, we needed more people getting shots at the athletic director, and as I said, in our searches, we always have a pretty diverse candidate pool, and my observation had become that they were getting to the table, but a lot of them weren't prepared for the interview.
Right.
They weren't prepared to sit across from that search committee and talk about, really how to raise money, how to hire coaches, if they were in a school with football, how to relate to the football. So, a couple things. Part one of this question is, in relation to the female interaction with the males and the search committees, and a lot of them, they're pretty diverse search committees now, but there's still a lot of old school folks. I mean, have you seen people being treated differently because they're female? You remember a point in your career where you've had to overcome that piece of it? I mean, is there a time either one of you have had to?
Have you treated people differently, right?
I can speak to that a little bit, and I'm gonna take the positive angle because again, there's battles all the time, and I would say that people of color could probably look at our industry and say that there's
Yes.
battles for them as well, and they're very real and no different than for a young person, male or female. But what I've seen recently is advocacy, and the people who can provide the best advocacy for talented people of either gender is to get them in the mix. So where I've been helped personally and where I've seen colleagues helped advance in the industry is to have someone empowered just decide that they are going to give you that opportunity and experience and not just send you out there and say, good luck, hope it works, but to really mold, shape, coach, mentor, and allow some successes and failure. What a great lesson, no different than our student athletes are getting from coaches. Like, get on out there and try, learn from your, dust ups, but keep moving. And I know that most of the breaks that I've gotten in my career, some have been by empowered females. At Texas, we were one of the few schools in the country that had a separate women's athletics program for a long time. So when I got to Texas, I saw a female boss for the first time. But before then, all of my bosses were male, and they were perfectly wonderful mentors who kept pushing me and advising me how to do hard work to advance. So again, I think today, to answer the question about how you get to the next chair, it's going to be the mostly male leaders, some female, who really have to shape and mold those people who are able to sit before a college president and articulate a vision, know what really happens in football, not only on the field, but behind those walls when they're trying to hire coordinators or the 9 analysts they might need, or what the recruiting process is. Getting exposure to those things, there's no substitute for it. So the real great leaders are giving people the opportunities to really sit and not only participate, but to have the chance to be part of the decision-making process in those areas.
And Greg, I was joking when I said that before. As a search firm, that's the question we get from women all the time. Are they? I don't think they are. You and I think you have been fabulous, and you've given us so much great feedback.
Thank you.
Compositely that we can share with women. And Chris is right, and Chris and I have talked about this, and you and I have. I've been fortunate to have many men that have helped me in my career. I think the reality is overall, though, that we all know when we talk about diversity, there are differences. Actually, there are women or people of color that haven't advanced because the people in the chairs right now are white men of influence, and it's not conscious all the time, but we actually surround ourselves with people that look like us. There's all sorts of research. So it's not that I don't think that there's a group of mean people saying we don't want them and them and them there. I do think, though, our culture's changing, our society's changing,
Absolutely.
We're coming a long way, but the reality is, if you look across the board, there's a reason why there's not that many, women or people of color in leadership positions, not just in athletics, but all over. Some of it is overt discrimination, certainly, but much of it is, I think, subconscious. And it's just that we're learning as people how to include people that look different than we do and that come from a different path than we do. I think we can all understand how, 10 or 15 years ago, presidents would think it made sense for athletic directors to hire men that maybe supposedly had played football or, were perceived as having great relationships with these big donors that were former football players. And hopefully now times are changing so they can see how a woman could step into that role.
We just hired, a new football coach in Tom Herman. His director of football operations is a female, Tori Takel.
Yeah, which is fantastic.
And that's different in our world.
Absolutely.
But she's not the first, but she won't be the last.
Right.
Yeah, I think when you look at this and you brought up, you have gender diversity and then you have ethnicity diversity. Since we've been involved, the one thing I keep saying is I see people getting in the room.
Yep.
What my next thing is, I want to see people blowing search committees and presidents away
Right.
with their preparation.
Right.
So, it's hard to get in the room. I think we're past that point where,
Right.
females are getting interviews and diversity candidates are getting interviews. They are.
Yep.
But now the next step is making sure everybody is prepared to blow that committee away. So there's no doubt after, they interview 5 or 6 or however many people have been reviewed for the candidate or for the position, that they went in there and people go, wow, I want that person representing my university or my college. So I think that's kind of the next step. I know we're all talking about that all the time. And, it kind of goes back to what the second part of my question was going to be. I mean, do you feel, and you're both in big leadership positions, do women lead differently? Do they have to lead differently? Or at this point, is it just, lead?
Right. I think they do, but I want to go back to your other point too, which you made a great point, and we've talked about this. The piece is you've got to win the interview, and then you've got to be able to do the job. And sometimes you can do the job, but you just might not be the kind of outgoing, savvy, whatever, to win the interview. And we've talked about that. And are they connected? Is it needed to do the job? I think we've seen there's all sorts of different personalities in those leadership positions, but I don't think women get the chance to be different. I think there's an expectation of how one should act in an interview, and I think guys might get a broader spectrum of ability to kind of be outside that lane than women, and that's just because there's not as many women that have advanced into that. So you bring up a good point. The whole savvy thing, I think men and women are different in how they interact and how they joke together, and so that lends itself to guys having a little more savviness actually when they get in the room around the table with big donors and money folks. So we're working on that. But then you ask another great question. Are we different in leadership? I do think women bring certainly the normal skill sets that might be needed, but I do think women can bring some different qualities that we're seeing now, and there's research done about that might be great. I mean, women are more inclusive. Women are more collaborative. They seem to listen more and draw things out from others more. Now, again, these are all generalizations, so it doesn't mean that there's, there's great male leaders out there that have these skill sets. But you asked, do women bring different things? And I think that's yes. Women can bring a different set of skills that actually would be very helpful, especially in today's day and age.
I think women, too, in approaching jobs, they really have to have a fit feel to win that interview.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yep.
in other words, I think women have a really hard time faking something if it's just not the right feel or fit.
Yeah.
That's how really genuine I think most of the women who are in this profession at any level are. They're honest to a fault if they're in an area that they've either outgrown, outlived, or just they could do it in their sleep and they're looking for that next
Yep.
stage. I mean, I had a staff member email me yesterday just saying, okay, I think I've done this piece of my work. Is there another area that I could flourish in because I'm still hungry, I still want to contribute? Again, that is honesty.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
Around employees, that's what you want. You can facilitate advancement for employees who are that honest with you. And I think in an interview setting, again, remember, interviews are two-way streets. You want to impress a room, but you also want to get the feel for the room. Is this right for me? And I just think women have this innate radar on whether the situation is right, and sometimes that interview is exactly what they are, and if it's perceived that it's
Yeah.
not a fit from the other end, that doesn't mean it's wrong. It's just not this one.
Yep.
I think one of the things that you bring up is important is managing your career. I mean, I think, the collegiate world is been historically, you have to move out to move up. So people are always looking for that next opportunity. So every time one opens, they're throwing their name in, not knowing whether they're the right fit or not doing enough research on the school, on whether or not that's, they have their same values, they have their same approach to athletics, where does it fall in academically and all of those things. So I think really doing research about a school before you start throwing your name in the hat. And we all know that there's some folks that every time a job comes up, their name comes up over and over again. They eventually don't get any opportunities because they've worn out their brand, more or less. So, I always think you need great mentors. I think there's a lot of people that want to help people, females, males, doesn't matter. You have to find great mentors to help you guide and make those decisions. I guess, excuse me, What do you think, as we wrap up, what are the biggest challenges that women in athletics are going to face over the next 3 to 5 years?
I am, again, concerned a lot about the diversity and not just in gender. Again, it's no secret the number of student athletes that we have that come from different backgrounds, and I think they need to be able to walk into their training centers, into their academic facilities, into their administrative offices, and see people who look like them and they can relate. It has become sort of our top priority in our recruiting areas that are for HR purposes, that we really need to widen the pool, and we are all accountable for identifying individuals who are talented, but also who are different than us. In other words, purposely find people that are different, because the more disparate and the more different your room is, the wider scope and the more inclusive actually that you become in your decision making in your operations.
And to drill down a little bit more, as far as the challenges in getting hired into especially Power 5 jobs in the next 3 years, I think that's going to be a real challenge for women, actually, and it has been. Part of the reason is, with everything going on in Division I, Power 5, with the money, the budgets, the high-paid football coaches, they want to hire people that they've seen have had a direct experience in that, which means they're recycling other folks from the Division I, Power 5 level, and those happen to be men. Part of that is understandable. And then actually, if you check the track record, and Jason might have the specific on this, I can only think of in the last 5 or 6 years 2 people that have been hired as Power 5 ADs that weren't sitting ADs. And so 1 male, 1 female. It's just not the norm anymore. So that means we got to figure out how to get women at some level so that they have the experience, but then they have to be at a level where they can win at football and where they have big enough budgets where they're seen as a possibility then to step up. Right now, the trend has been that, we're recycling sitting ADs. And again, part of that is understandable, but right now the sitting ADs are male. So when you talk about challenges, it's how do we get women to break through that perception, number one, that you have to be a sitting AD to manage all this. And that's not our perception, but it's out there because that's what's happening. But then two, how do we get them at those jobs at that level where they can use that as a platform and a stepping stone to get up to that next level?
Yeah. Well, I know from our perspective, it's kind of our job with you, obviously, because you represent such a big part of those the female athletic world, to identify the up-and-comers.
Right.
In our conversations with the schools that we do searches for, we always have that. What does the pool look like? Does it have to be a sitting AD? Can we go identify up-and-comers? What are the skills that you need? How is your constituency going to react? The reality is there's a lot of people involved in these decisions. And the bigger the school, the more people outside the immediate universe. There's alumni who want to have a say.
Right.
You buy a $10 ticket, and that gives you a right to give your opinion on who should be the athletic director. But it's risk-taking, I think, on the university's part a lot to go with the unknown, because they're going to have to answer to those constituents.
Yep.
The way I always present it is the only reaction that most of the constituency will have when the new AD is announced is they're going to Google that person.
Yep.
And they're going to see what they did somewhere else. They don't know anything about them. The search committee has done their due diligence. We have done our due diligence, so we know the real person. Until they get a chance to prove themselves, the fan base and everybody else is going to react to what they did and where they were. So it's sometimes difficult for the school to take that risk, even if for a 2 or 3 month, to not be in alignment with what their fan base is doing. So I think we all kind of have to work together. We have to do deeper dives on people's backgrounds. We have to mentor them to be ready. They have to interview better, and that's across the board. That's not just females or diversity candidates. I can tell you across the board, there's always one person who gets the job and X amount who don't. They deserve the feedback on where they fell short too, and I think that hasn't historically happened, and that needs to be done, because that's how you groom people to get better.
Yep.
I think one last point, in our business, I don't think there's any greater pride by someone in a leadership position in that you could have a hand in grooming your successor and other successors. And to have a hand in that right now, there could be no greater gift to college athletics, not only to diversify the candidates, but the opportunity is there. all the people, think about how many great administrators are reaching retirement age or maybe have retired recently. And you look at, our commissioners group, there's going to be another wave there among the 30-plus conferences. So they don't want to go off to their well-deserved time without knowing that who's going to carry on the great work to set up this great entity we know as college athletics. They want to be sure that they're leaving the place in good hands with good people, and they've got the power to do that.
Yep.
I think, lastly, there is an aging out in collegiate athletics. One of the things that we observe now as a search firm, and it's not only with athletics, by the way, it's with presidents, it's with CFOs, it's with there are a lot of retirements happening, and historically higher ed is a lot of legacy. People go and they stay. I mean, it's just the nature of this. Moving forward, I personally don't see people taking those jobs and staying there 10 and 15 and 20 years because the skill sets have been changing. Just think about 10 years ago, coaches didn't have to deal with, and ADs didn't have to deal with social media.
Yeah.
And every day there's something being tweeted out or on Facebook, and kids bringing cell phones into the dugout and into the gym bag, and all of those things that you have to deal with now. But I do think they're looking for what's that new and different. And if somebody comes and they're there for 7 years, 10 years, and they have a big impact on fundraising and turning the program in a better direction, that's the legacy that they need to be prepared for. So I don't know if you're seeing that as well, or you're.
I think you're right. And the other dynamic that is very real is people in leadership outside of athletics are going to get opportunities, and not just in the AD roles, but in others as well, and on campuses as well. Again, higher education is sort of in the same changing environment that some of our units are on campus, and so keeping up and being able to continue to drive your organization forward, it takes, I think, a wider scope of being willing to put maybe maverick individuals in certain spots, because again, that can be just as effective as hiring somebody from within. So I see that as another trend.
Yeah, you opened a big can of worms with your last question there, but you are, and especially at the, the Power 5 level, when you talk about the differences, the money, even in the last 5 to 10 years, and the increase of it, and then the pressure to continue to raise that. So Chris is right, they're bringing in CEOs and business folks because it's now big business. It's not the same old kind of, what was considered mom and pop shop athletic department where you're hiring coaches. I think athletic directors are still doing that, but it's not perceived the same way anymore. It's perceived as you're running a big business.
Absolutely.
So the skill sets that they're looking for, it has changed in 5 years.
And where you're going to find very qualified people, if you are bringing in a CEO type to run the athletics program, who may not know really how many scholarships are in baseball and women's water polo, but where the people who do know the weeds of that and everyday operations are a lot of the women and some of the, again, mid-managers who are ready for those positions. So the assistant to the AD, the deputy to the AD, internal, external, you're seeing jobs now proliferate at just the underneath level that to me are really positive for preparing the next level of leader and athletic director.
Right. All right. Ladies, I thank you so much
Thank you.
for your time. This was great, and I hope everybody else gets to enjoy it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.